What is VE Day? VE Day stands for Victory in Europe. Germany had surrendered unconditionally to the Allies. It wasn't the end of the Second World War, but it was the beginning of the end. There had been rumours that a ceasefire had taken place, but it was not officially announced till the next day, when Winston Churchill said, "Peace had come to Europe."
Today is Victory in Europe Day.
This was the moment we'd all been waiting for. Enormous crowds had gathered outside the House and all over the centre of London to hear the end of the war in Europe officially announced by the Prime Minister. True, VE Day had been anticipated by the people of London, who'd done a bit of unofficial celebrating the previous evening. But this was the real moment, and this is how Winston Churchill ended his broadcast.
Advance, Britannia! Long live the cause of freedom! God save the King!
It must have been extraordinary to be waiting at Buckingham Palace, waiting to see the King, to see him rejoicing with the people that the fighting had come to an end. I was reading recently about how a woman who was there at the time, and she said it was an electric atmosphere. The idea that people were so happy that the fighting had come to an end in Europe. You can see from the films the sheer joy on the people's faces, how happy they were to know that peace had come to Europe. For the last 5, nearly 6 years, all they had known was war. People danced in the streets, people sang songs, people lit fires, which is quite poignant because the years of the war led to a lot of blackouts in major cities and areas where they weren't allowed to have any light. So lighting a bonfire was an exciting thing. It must have been extraordinary for children at that time who mostly had only known war, to see such colour, such sound and such rejoicing. A lot of the newspaper articles at the time reported obviously street parties, and you can see from the pictures the majority of the people that were taking place were children. It must have been a bittersweet time for those people back in the UK, waiting for news on their loved ones, knowing that some of those men would never come back. They'd made the ultimate sacrifice. Of course, the press and the newspapers were there covering the rejoicing and the celebration. But one man in Gateshead decided to go a bit further. It's very, very rare for people to own home cine cameras. And this chap, he managed to capture a street in Gateshead of the VE celebrations. They are extraordinary scenes, and the fact he managed to capture these moments in colour. I see a lot of colourised film, and I really am not a fan of it. I was a bit sceptical when I first saw this, and I read that he'd used colour film to capture this time. And the fact that this film has been preserved 80 years later is really, really important, because it helps us to look back at those people who had endured the war. When I looked at the map to see where this street was, it was called Fleming Street, and it was in Gateshead near the River Tyne. Unfortunately, that street has now been demolished, and I've driven past it hundreds of times. Old houses were demolished in the late 50s and 60s, especially in Newcastle and the Gateshead area. So I did a bit of digging to try and find an old map, and I found Fleming Street, which runs adjacent to the actual River Tyne. And every time I'll go past it, I'll remember the fact that these people were real people and they existed and lived through such an awful time in history. Why do I think it's important to remember VE Day? We in Europe have been fortunate to experience peace for a long time. When we look at the people who lived through that time during the Second World War and the sacrifices they made those sacrifices for the freedom that we have today. I can't imagine what it would be like had we not won the Second World War. I hope by looking at the celebrations and reminding ourselves of what VE Day is all about will help us look to the future